This is Procreate. Meet Dolly. This is my dog Dolly. I painted her a few years ago, and if you didn't see the whole time lapse, you're welcome because it is quite long. But if we want to look through it, we can just kind of scrub through. I just started with a couple of paintings. Boom, this part here, that's a great thing where you can lasso and a little bit of your painting. It's still your drawing. It's not cheating. You still made all those lines. You can keep them if you want, and you don't have to if you don't want. So this is about being free and kind of like knowing a few different techniques to use. Once I kind of have them all sketched out rough, then I worry about the blacks. And then I start laying on color on top of and behind. Oh, and then I do, I start with the flat colors, then I do shading and highlights, shadows and highlights, and then I kind of go through and do detail, go over everything with the multiply layers, start painting in the light, then kind of like really put her face next to her drawing of her face so that I can work in higher detail. This was, of course, not the best camera and everything else at the time. A little bit of texture in the background. She has quite a long tongue. And then we get to the end here. So this is Procreate. And all of your paintings and drawings are recorded. So you can just click over here and come to your time where it says video. You can see it right here. And then go to time-lapse replay and it will automatically start playing. If you click in the gallery, obviously here is all of your files and you can put together whatever. You can also add the files together and it will call it a stack. I don't know why it calls it a stack and not a file. It's got to be some kind of proprietary thing for Microsoft, but in any event, we don't need to worry about that just yet. This is really fun when we do. Hold on. Some of the things that we're going to talk about here are extremely simple. Some of the things are not so simple. What I try to do is start with the very simple concepts, right? You probably have brush packs. You probably understand what the stamp brushes are, but we're going to get into that first and talk about some stuff with layers, and then we're going to get into something simple like coloring 3 balls. What's the easiest way to make a full color image from a white piece of paper, right? And so this is kind of why not everything that I do is going to be super tattooy. When it is super tattoo related, I'll get a line drawing, or I might use some pre-made brushes. I'll try to note what set they're from. I don't know that it really matters. But here is what we have going on. So that's everything this is basically your files. When you open up Procreate, that's what you'll come into. You can select one of the files. You can select them and group them. You can import a file or a photo. Oh yeah, here's photo. So you can import a file or you can do a photo. And when you hit the plus sign, you're given a bunch of sizes of canvas. Now, when I am working for a tattoo, I normally do paper, just because I know that that's going to print out the same size as a piece of paper. So whatever size it looks like on my tablet's about the size of a piece of paper, that's about what size I'm going to tattoo it. If you're making art and you're trying to sell a design, it's 9x16 is a much better crop because number one, we're tattooing and we're doing mostly tall parts of the body. And number two, when you're playing your playback video for Instagram, YouTube, anything like that, it's already in the 9x16 format. So that's what I would go with there. First order of business is when you come in, you're probably going to have a brush selected. Let's go ahead and I'm using the wrong thing. So we're just going to start with this brush here and give us a new layer. And I'm going to get deeper into all this stuff right now, but just to show you, this brush is in a new layer that does not affect the layers beneath it, right? So we can move this around and do whatever we want with it. This affects the size of that brush. This affects the opacity of that brush. If this is turned down, it will be very small, right? And so that's kind of how we're controlling which marks are made. This is your back and forward button all the way over here on the side. If you want to step backwards or go forwards, you can also step on, what's up?
Can you cut the pizza?
Yeah, I'll be out in a minute. You can also triple tap to go forward, double tap to go backward, and you can change the taps if you want. This very first button here, the Actions tab, will allow you to add a file, a photo. You can take a photo, and so when you take the photo, it'll just be in here. So for instance, say you want to work on a wall and you take a photo of a wall or the client, you can then just work on top of that photo from inside of here. This is also where you're going to want to go to add text. So this is like kind of a weird place to have it, but you can add text and it is underneath this little wrench sign. The next thing is canvas, and so this is where you're going to handle your resizing. Is always related, the size and pixels of your canvas and the amount of layers you can have are related. So the bigger your canvas is, the less number of layers you can have. and your layers are going to come in importance very quickly. So generally the way to go is you start with like a little bit lower resolution, so you have more layers that you can stack and move around and edit. And then once you get to like a final drawing or something, you take all those layers and you smash them down to one layer, and then you blow the canvas up to a size where you might only have 5 layers to work with, because it has to save all the pixels in that layer, because the file size has to be able to save all the pixels in one layer for as many layers as you have. So if you have more pixels per layer, you have less layers to work with. If you have less pixels per layer, you have more layers to work with. And the point of your painting will, the point you are at in your painting process will dictate which of those you need. Generally, earlier on is going to be lower resolution, a lot of layers. So start there. And then when you go into here and you hit the settings, you're going to want to use this little link to keep these linked together, so that when you change the size, it changes both sides. You can change the DPI. 300 is print resolution. Web resolution is 72. Resampling the canvas means that that everything's going to get bigger. And I think, let's see if that's accurate. And then not resampling the canvas, just the canvas itself is going to get bigger. And then we can snap to different grids. So let's resample and see. Settings, 32, done. Maximum layers exceeded at 300 DPI. So 11 by 8.5, so that's 25. 20. And so now, yeah, this whole thing is the same size. Whereas if we didn't do that and we said, so if you don't have resample selected, it will enlarge the whole canvas. If you have it resample, it will resize everything that's on the canvas to the new size. Didn't need to do that, so we'll just hit the back button. This is where you can do animation assist and page assist. We're not going to get into those in this course because it's just a little bit beyond the scope of what we need to do, but we will get into the drawing guide that will allow us to, I don't want a writing direction, what's this? We can then click our layer. From there we click drawing assist, and then when we draw on that layer, these things will be copied, right? Like a mandala. It has very limited options for mandalas. However, there's still definitely a lot you can do with it. We can also, when we turn on that drawing guide, we can edit the drawing guide, and we can change the color of the drawing guide so it shows up better. Let's do purple. We can make it be a 2D grid where everything snaps. You can change the thickness and the opacity of the grid. We can do an isometric, so say you want to do an isometric drawing, then that's already set up, and each stroke that you make will be on that line. So if you're making industrial drawings and you want to know that this table, everything is going to be in perspective, you might want to use the isometric stuff. Right, so excuse my sketching. I'll just sketch all this stuff out to demo it, and I feel bad that it's not the cleanest stuff, but I think that sharing the idea is the important part. You can also have a reference layer. So what your reference layer is going to do is give you, whatever you want to have as a reference. You can have something there to look at, which it's dark in here, but that's kind of, you can, let me get a better picture on here for you guys. Clear, import, boom. Cool. So maybe we want to have whatever you want to have right there while you're drawing. You can do that with the reference layer. You can flip your drawing horizontal. You can flip it vertical. This is very important. We don't ever talk about this in tattooing, or we rarely talk about this in tattooing, but if you're drawing something and it's ready to go on skin, flip it over. Just see what it looks like from the other side, right? Could you easily put it on either arm or on either side, or does it look wonky from one side? Because it's very easy to get into a drawing and not see something that everybody else sees. I've done it a ton, and it's painful once you install a piece of artwork and it's up there and done, and you're out of luck. Our sharing will allow us to control what kind of image it is. We're generally going to be using a JPEG if we're sharing an image, a PNG if we need that image to have a transparent background, and a PSD if we are going to work on this in a program like Procreate, and a Procreate file if you're sharing it with a coworker. The rest of these things don't really matter. You can share animated layers, and there's different styles of layers, but we're probably not going to get into too much of that because it's just not really within the scope of what we're dealing with. We have the time-lapse replays. We can turn on and off the time-lapse recording. I think earlier that it was on all the time, which might not be accurate. And we can export that drawing. Don't purge the video. We can have a right-handed interface, which I am and should probably use. I don't use it because I'm normally drawing with this hand and using this with my thumb in the other hand. So let me go ahead and turn that back off. Dynamic brush scaling. I'm not sure exactly what that does, but it will have something to do with changing the size of the brush along with the canvas size. Some brushes can be made to stay at a certain number of pixels, and that'll probably just allow them to be made at any size. Project canvas, if you want to project this onto an AirPlay device like a TV or something like that. If you want to see the brush cursor on there, you can see how big it is when you move it. You can also make it so that that doesn't show up, right? So you're just painting and you're never seeing that cursor. I like the cursor on there. It also lets you see it. Oh, not that. This. Let's do high contrast, brush, high contrast, both. Okay. No, we want this only to show while hovering. High contrast, active color per brush. Will be fun. And so that's it for the tools palette. Just to jump through these real quick, the first set over here is going to be your actions. Then you're going to have your adjustments. We're going to get into this one a bit later. We're going to spend actually quite a bit of time in here, but we're not going to worry about that quite yet. We have your selection tool. So whether you want to use an ellipse to select, and then the move tool to move things around. We didn't copy there because we left this on. So to move, we can move things around. In this case, all these three balls are, or spheres or circles, are on the same layer, right? We can also have it so that they are on their own unique layers and can move around on their own. Oh, we are in this one, right? And we can move this however we like. In other instances, you're going to want, let's turn this off and turn this one on, the shading or lighting in a separate layer than the color. Let's see what all of these turn off, right? So sometimes you want to keep those separate so you can edit them later. And so what I've done here is I've just kind of put everything together and then I smashed it down so that the blue ball and its shading went together and the green ball and its shading went together. But of course that is quite unnecessary because we can also change our layer style so that if we want to add a layer, change it to color and change this to teal, it would change it based on what's underneath there, right? It can just make that now a teal ball. If that's not how you want to see it done, then we can also make this a clipping mask. Here we go, clipping mask. And you'll notice that we have that little arrow. There's a little arrow that's popped up right here that shows that this layer is connected to the layer underneath it. And then when we paint, we cannot paint outside of the layer, right? So we can very easily change the color of things. We're not going to get into that stuff quite yet. I just want to go over these selection tools. So we have our ellipse. This is our move tool. So if we want to select something and then move it, we have to go back and forth, but we're focusing on the moving stuff. You can also, if you're, let's say, drawing freehand, we can add to our selection because add is selected. If we want to remove from our selection, we can. And what you'll notice, you can't see it on my screen, but there's a little bit of zebra markings and it's everywhere that is not the selection. And you can definitely, I'm sure, turn that up and down. I don't like a lot of stuff in my way visually, so this is usually about enough. We can invert our section, and that means select the outside and leave the inside protected, right? We can also take our section and copy and paste it into a new layer. So let's see, freehand, copy and paste. You'll notice that now that is its own layer and it hasn't affected that layer. So you can just sample from something and then just, you still have the whole original. You don't have to necessarily destroy it. Then we have feathering, and what feathering means is feathering is a blend or a gradient, right? So where this selection tool has a very hard edge, you can feather it quite a bit, and then when you paint, it will give you a soft edge instead of something with a very hard edge. And depending on what you're doing, that is super useful. When most of us that are tattooing are used to line-driven art, and that's pretty much what we're going to stick to in here, that line art and then pencil drawing kind of into painting type art. Working with lassos and these hard and soft edges is an awesome way to work. I don't do it nearly enough. Hopefully some of you guys are into it and I'll get to do some demos. We can also save and load. So if you have a selection that is like, you know, one side of a face or one side of a building, and maybe in one amount, maybe at one time you need to like affect all the buildings on their shadow side, and you want to be able to paint a big smooth gradient across that. That might be a situation where you want to make your selection and then be able to come back and load it back in later, right? Where it's like, cool, this one is the right sides of the buildings, so make the right side of the buildings, give me a big blend brush, do the gradient on all of them. So if we want to do this, we can save it, and then every time we come back to it, even if we deselect everything, switch layers, load that selection up, oh, there we go, and only part of it was overlapping the other image. We'll eventually do exercises with all these. Right now I'm more concerned with just like showing you guys the basics. This is all probably stuff you're already learning or know. If we make a star and we save and load that section, and then we come into a new layer, we load both of these sections, switch over to a brush, let's do a softer brush, and this will allow us to see where the edges are, right? So if you want to have a gradient across this whole thing where it's got a soft blend in there, you might want to have it like this, right, where you've made all the sharp edges and you're using a brush that has a transitional area in it already so that it has soft edges to do your blend. Then you're doing it with one stroke, right? Perfect blend, just like in tattooing. Maybe not one stroke like tattooing, but you know what I'm saying. And then we have the move tool. So let's go ahead and turn this guy back on. Here we can move, and uniform is the way you're going to want to go if you want to just like move things. Then we can do freeform, in which we can mess up the proportions of what we got going on here. In uniform, it will always keep these proportions the same. In freeform, you can edit the height and width. If we want to distort it, we're going to move only one of these blocks at a time, and you can move this thing through space or animate it, or you can do all kinds of stuff. And then of course we have warp. So if you want to make this like a ball like it's going somewhere, let's see, how would we do squash and strip? Maybe the ball looks like it's bouncing. It's a little bit wider, a little bit tall, a little bit shorter, okay? So that's pretty straightforward. Then we can snap to different sizes, right? It's going to snap us to different places. I don't know exactly how the math is done on this. We can have an advanced mesh, so maybe you only want to move one section of it. My favorites, of course, are flip horizontal, flip vertical. You'll notice they've given you a couple different places to do that in the program because it's pretty important and we don't do it enough. Maybe you want to fit it to the canvas at its biggest measurement, right? So in this case, the width is 11 inches, so it's going to make it 11 inches wide. And then so your interpolation method is the way that the pixels are adjusted when you are stretching, squashing, stretching, that kind of thing. As far as bilinear or bicubic, I would do what looks right and what feels right. Try it. If it doesn't look right, back up and try it again. So that's that. That's the most important stuff for the left-hand side menus. Then we get to the fun stuff. Then we get to the right-hand side menus. So the first thing to understand is going to be that your brush library goes under your brushes. You can have a ton of different brush tips. I've gone over the years and gotten a ton of these. It is largely a waste because I really stick to everything that is in basics, and then I have this one. It's called personal set. I'm gonna make that available to you guys, and so you can kind of just like use, this is the main ones that I use, and it's kind of like a mix between these two. And luckily what you can do is you can duplicate any of these brushes and then change the settings. We're going to get into that in depth here in a second. There's a couple of main types of brushes. There are these, you know, a regular brush. This one happens to have some kind of texture. You guys saw the round ones working. You can put other kinds of textures in there depending on what you're going for. You can space things out so that this one dot, this would make a line normally. Because we're spreading out the distance that you have to travel for this thing to repeat itself, it can come out to a dotted line. You can do lines, dashes, triangles. It's a great idea to make a symbol and then to make it into a dotted line brush, and then those different dotted lines can signify different things in your stencils. So when you're making a stencil and an area has little triangles around it, you know that's a highlight. Or when it has little dashes, you know that's a shadow. And when it has little balls, you know that's a core shadow, right? There's all kinds of different things that you can do that you'll end up, little life hacks that you'll make for yourself. But if you don't know how the tools work, then it's going to be real hard to do. That's what we're getting through. The thing that most people are going to use most often, let's see, these are photo brushes. Let's get into, we need the stamp. Roses by Will Bledsoe. Oh, okay. Painted by Corey Ferguson. I like Corey Ferguson. So you can, these are stamp brushes, and what that means is that every time you stamp it, you put it down, it's not meant to be repeated. It just goes one time. Now, of course, it can be repeated, but it can also be anything that is in any black and white image. So what that means is if you have drawn something such as your favorite claw or your favorite peony or your favorite anything, you can save that as a black and white drawing into your brushes. So when you make Flash, it shouldn't just be that you've painted out Flash. It should be that you have a line drawing set as a brush in Procreate, so that at any point you can add that Flash to any other drawing, or make it at any size for any client, right? It's not just about draw it so you have it one time. If you are going to draw it and have it one time, then when you do your inking and you do your lines, take a photo of that and save that photo as a brush, and then you can use it digitally as many times as you want. And so those are the three main types of brushes, right? You're going to have your stamp brushes, you're going to have your regular in-house brushes, hard rounds, soft rounds, air brushes, and then you're going to have your textured brushes, right? Brushes that are set to do a certain thing, and they come from a certain place and they leave a certain type of mark. And there's a lot of that we're going to get into. The important part for the moment is that everything that you ever put into your brush library is also going to go into your smudge library in the same order, and is also going to go into your eraser library in the same order. It is all one menu of brushes. You are just selecting which tip and settings you're going to use for the task at hand. So for brushes, that's the main stuff, and then we're going to get into layers. So we're not going to do a super deep dive on layers right now, but suffice it to know that the beautiful part here is it's like tracing paper, right? Where you can draw a thing and then lay a layer over it and then draw right on top of it and then layer over it and draw right on top of it. All the layers are 100% clear. You can put anything on them and you wouldn't know that they were there unless you opened the layer stack. The more you have things separated out, the more you can move them around later and the more you can edit them later. So even if it's like the shading on, let's look at this. So we have this ball here, right? And we have our base color, we have our shadow color, and we have our highlight color. But the beautiful thing is that we've kept these all in different layers. So if I wanted to say, let's say for instance, I wanted to come into this base layer where it's just the color. Now you can't see the other layers at all because they are clipping masked to this layer, so they will only show on that layer. So if the pixels within that layer are hidden, then you won't be able to see anything through it. But what we can do is we can adjust that layer and we can adjust the hue, so we're just adjusting the color, and we can come back and change that without having to change the whole thing. Now, in this instance, it would probably be fine to change the whole thing. However, in certain instances, what you're going to want to do is only mess with this shadow color, right? Oh, my shadow color doesn't look right. Let's go ahead and make that like a cooler shadow. Maybe it's a little bit too saturated. And then maybe it's also a little bit opaque. So let's kind of like tone it down. So we've made quite a bit of changes there to get to that from this, right? And so by keeping things separated into separate layers, you're going to have a lot more flexibility. And so for me personally, I'm a flexibility kind of guy. I want to know that I can save the information in a certain way that allows me to make the most changes later and over time. However, sometimes the layer stack gets really confusing, and when you're certain about a part, you want to smash it down and just leave it and move on, right? So that would be the reason that you want to keep everything separate. And then once you're done, of course, you can make everything into its own, so that they're complete but in their own layers. And then you can also just squash all that together so that it's like this. The difference here is that if you were to move one of these balls, let's say we're going to select and we're going to do automatic, and we're just going to do this one, and we're just going to keep dragging around until we have all of it. I didn't want that. We're going to add freehand, and you'll notice the zebra takes care of where we're at. So now if I were to move this one, there's nothing behind that, right? This is one just like flat layer of paint or pixels, however you want to say it, and everything's together, as opposed to this looks exactly the same, but you can move it around. Why am I warping it? Let's just do uniform. But you can move this and the other balls are still going to be back there, right? So this is the same thing in 3 layers. So just be cognizant of that, and when you hear everybody bitching that they were working in the wrong layer, it's a real thing. The faster you can get to figuring out your layer strategy, the better you are at naming your layers, the better you are. Don't look at mine, because I don't do that. I visually kind of just look at where it is in the frame and what's in there, and I go for it, but it does lead to a lot of hunting back and forth. Later on, we're going to get into a couple things, like if you click the in here, you can change the opacity of the layer. You can also change layer styles. We're not going to worry about that quite yet, but it is going to come in later, and that is right here. You can also click on the layer and have these options of rename, select, copy. You can fill the layer, clear the layer, alpha lock the layer. What alpha lock does is it means you can no longer paint new pixels on the layer. So everything that is transparent will remain transparent. Everything that is opaque will remain opaque, and when you paint, that edge will stay defined. And anything that is a mixture of the two, some kind of blend, some kind of gray, is going to be the same way. That's all going to reflect. So that'll come in like a transition, right? If you have a shape, let's say we duplicate this, get rid of it, and we are going to select automatically everything, and then we wanted to feather it, and then we want to paint. You'll notice that it kind of drops off on the side here, right? That tone of opacity that we put into the layer mask by feathering the mask is making it so that it gets lighter near the edge, right, where it's feathered at. And so to show kind of like a more basic set, you can kind of see how it's tapered at the sides, or it is feathered at the sides, so it can't get as opaque on the sides as it does in the open areas. We can also mask. If you know what this is, good. If you don't know what this is, even better. Get ready to have your socks blown off. What it basically means is that you can hide or show any portion of any layer. So right now, you'll notice this is white because it is showing the green ball, and everything else is black, right? Now, the beautiful part here is if I change the color to black and I paint through here, it's going to make what is in that layer disappear, right? And obviously, like, we could use an eraser on that layer. Let's turn this up and do the same thing. But the difference here is that when we're painting in the mask, now if we paint with white, you'll notice that all that's in this mask layer is black and white. We can actually just paint that back in. So if you painted some detail somewhere and you want to get rid of some of it, but you don't know if you want to get rid of it forever, use masking. They call it non-destructive editing. We're going to get real deep into it. It's a lifesaver. Every layer you have can have a mask. And then what that mask is doing is showing what is visible in the layer on a map of black and white. So the things that are completely white are 100% opaque. The things that are black are invisible, and everything that's feathering of gray in the middle, right, anywhere from 10% to 1% to 99% black, is going to reflect that opacity, right? So the cool thing there is that you can do all sorts of stuff once you start layering some of these techniques into, like, oh, if you do that in a mask versus doing it in a clipping layer, you might get a little bit different result. It might change your workflow a little bit. So we're going to be getting into all that stuff too. That's a little bit more in depth, but for now, let's go to understand. We can do the clipping mask. I kind of went through that a bit. We'll go through it a little bit deeper as we work. Drawing assist, that is going to be your mandalas, snapping to your mandalas and grids once you put them in. And when you have the mandala or grid, it's on or off per layer. So when you turn the drawing assist on, it will turn it on for over the whole drawing for all the layers. But when you're using it, it's only on and off for an individual layer. So if you click drawing assist, then it will say assisted, and it will stick to all of those lines. You'll notice that we had the isometric grid before, and that's what it's doing, is it's still just giving me that isometric grid. Then of course we can invert our image. We can use this as a reference layer. We can use this as a reference layer. We can use this as a reference layer, which we will get into later. We can merge it down, and merging is when you're putting these layers together. So this is cool to do with this one. And then we can combine down. And so what that's going to do is put that layer and the layer beneath it into a new group. So you can just turn a group on and off. This is not a great example of it, but when we get into other things later, let's say you draw a ship and you've drawn this awesome pirate ship and you want to make sure that the architecture of the ship is right, so you draw it without sails and then you put sails on. Or maybe you've done it vice versa and you put the sails on and you've noticed that the architecture is not right in the uprights. I'm not sure exactly what those are called right now, but having the ability to turn on and off the waves, the mess, the light, the sails is going to be vital to being able to see, where your mistakes and pitfalls are. So that's that on the fun stuff. That's basically how you open and use Procreate. Now, we are going to do a little bit deeper dive into each one of these things. The first thing I want to get into is over here. It's going to be the color picker. We'll get into that in just a minute, but I just wanted to show you the basic interface and where things are at, how important the layers are. I know a lot of people that are starting are just going to really work in one layer and kind of treat it like a painting, where you just like layer everything up. My opinion is this: you have a certain set of tools. You should know how to use those tools. You should also know how to translate that to 2D, right? So, or a flat surface or real life. So if you're able to make a painting in a certain way, so if you're able to make a digital painting in a certain way, you should be able to print that out and then also do it in colored pencil, also be able to do it as a tattoo. It should just be a series of tools that you know how to use. However, it can be very frustrating to learn these tools. So that's kind of why I really want to make this class and go through it with a few people to kind of like cement the ideas and make sure that everybody has all the tools available at their disposal, even if it is outside of the box from how you are currently painting.